Going on, everybody, and thanks for tuning in. So today I am talking with one of my good buddies, Brian Naslund, author of the Dragons of Terra series from Tor Books. Brian, how you doing today?
I'm doing well. It's the tail end of a Friday, so I'm relaxed and making my way into the weekend, which is always a good feeling.
Absolutely, yeah. It's been kind of like an interesting day so far. Like I keep expecting just this massive slush pile of emails to happen in the next 50 minutes while we're chatting. But I'm like cautiously optimistic that it's not going to happen. That everybody's just like gone ahead and like is done for the day. But
you might make it. Yeah,
it's just this is not how my job goes, unfortunately. But yeah, it's nice that it's Friday and got another weekend of college football, which I know you're not a huge sports fan. I know we've talked about that before.
Yeah, I think we have. Yeah, I'm not. I don't follow any football very closely, but I'm excited for you though to have that.
Cool. Thank you so much. Yeah, I think we talked one time, and you like used to write in a sports bar, and it was just mostly for like the atmosphere and to kind of I guess get out of the house to write, but like you had no interest in actually looking up and seeing like, what was going on.
Yeah, I feel like the only sport that I understand well is baseball, but I don't like follow any teams anymore. So it's almost just a nice, like you're going to like take a thinking break from the book and you see a few pitches and then you go back down. But people would come and sit next to me like, hey, what's the score? Like, hey, who's playing? And I'm like, I don't know, man. Ask someone else.
They're like, how long have you been here? Like 2 hours.
2.5 hours. No idea what's going on.
What sports
got a really good curveball
though? Like you could like even like dumb it down even more and just be like, I think is it basketball or I don't know. I've got no clue.
Yeah, I feel like what the Penguins is probably what I can answer the best. And even then I might have to like go up and check because it's like a zone out thing and just like catching some kind of like movement or whatever. And yeah, that was an important part of my process, but I absorbed nothing. Like I couldn't even tell you. So I grew up in Baltimore and I liked baseball then, followed it more. I couldn't tell you a single person who's on the Orioles right now. I've lost all track of it.
Well, it does tend to change, from year to year. And some seasons you keep the same players, but you end up because I do a lot of fantasy baseball, so I kept up with baseball teams for the most part. I haven't done it since COVID just because it's really wonky. Like you'll have players and they have like COVID protocol and they're out. And you're just like, it's not worth keeping up with.
Yeah, it makes sense. It's not a fun element to the fantasy thing.
Yeah, it's not.
Yeah. Hyper realism.
He's healthy, but he just like had a negative. Like, why can't he play? He's 50 yards from the next guy in the outfield. He'll be fine. No. But yeah, so but you're fine. There's no way you would know anybody from now because like I don't think a single player from like 2 seasons ago is still on there. So
I think I did see an article that aren't the Orioles like one of the worst teams in baseball right now?
Probably.
I think
they generally are. They have been for a while.
Yeah, I feel like I can throw that out without any like. I think I saw that they were doing really poorly, and that's like usually the case. So I got that going for me.
That's it. Baltimore's struggling right now. Like I mean, even in football, I think they've lost like 3 or 4 players to like ACL like injuries in the past couple of days. So they've had to like scurry to sign 2 running backs the past 2 days. Yeah, it's nuts. So Baltimore, like, it's just not good for sports right now.
that's fair. Yeah, well, my heart goes out to my hometown. I'm sorry, Baltimore. Better luck next time.
There you go. So, tell me a little bit about yourself. I know we know each other, but just for the audience's sake, kind of, did you grow up reading? Did you grow up writing? And then, kind of like, when did the writing bug really hit?
Yeah, it's funny. I grew up reading fantasy some as kind of a younger kid, and I started out reading like the Arthurian legends and like the actual like not the originals. I can't remember the guy who wrote them, but like the kind of old English versions of them. And I think that I liked the idea of reading them more than I understood them or knew what was going on because I was like pretty little. But I liked knights and swords and stuff like that. And then I switched over. There was this YA series. Called The Lost Years of Merlin that I really liked, and I can't remember the guy who wrote it. I think he actually lives in Colorado, but that was the first like fantasy book that I would look at the map all the time in the beginning of the book before I went to bed and sort of just like daydream about the world. He goes on this island full of monsters and stuff like that. So I just really really liked that. But then I got away from reading fantasy for a long time and was doing kind of the English major thing and reading like Ernest Hemingway and Sylvia Plath and stuff like that, which was nice. And then I didn't really get back into fantasy. I didn't really write anything creatively until the last few years of college. And then it was kind of like Raymond Carver knockoff stories of like a guy driving home from work with existential dread. And that's the story. That's the whole thing that happens. And mine were pretty bad. I still have a few that I've gone back and read. I'm like, oh God, this is pretty rough. And then when I graduated from college, I started simultaneously writing fantasy and then also reading more of it. And I kind of started writing it before I had really begun reading it again. And it was the first like chapter of Blood of an Exile, the first book in the series I wrote like the day after college on a whim. I was like, no one's gonna read and grade this story anymore. So I'm gonna write about a hungover dude who has to kill a dragon, and something that I won't like get in trouble for in school. And then kind of a few months later, I was like, all right, if I'm gonna like keep on writing fantasy, I should probably like read a little bit of it. And so I've been reading shoot, I'm blanking on his name. Who's the guy who's the showrunner for Game of Thrones?
Oh, Martin.
No. I know him.
To the actual
Yeah.
producer. Oh gosh.
Hold on, I have his book over here because this will bother me the whole interview. Yeah, David Benioff. Jesus, I have terrible name recall. So he's a novelist, and I think he's a pretty good writer. I enjoyed some of his novels, and I'd like read them right as I was kind of finishing college, and I was like, all right, want some fantasy stuff. And Game of Thrones hadn't started yet, but there was like a footnote in his Wikipedia profile that he was the showrunner for a thing based off of A Song of Ice and Fire. So I was like, all right, well, I'll see what this is all about. And I'm sure I was kind of picturing like not very well done 80s sword and sorcery stuff, because that was kind of my impression of it. And then obviously it was like a completely different kind of awe-inspiring world with so many cool things. So I feel like that was my gateway like back into reading tons of fantasy, which I feel like was a lot of people's. And I put the footnote in that I started reading it before the show came out, but it was like a matter of months. The show came out. I think I was like halfway through reading all the books that were available when the show came out. So I was like just early enough to consider myself an OG fan. And then from there, it's like, once you're looking for books like that, you realize that there's just tons and tons of awesome authors out there. And so it was just this, just binge of all the kind of modern gritty fantasy that's been out there. And that kind of got me going.
I gotcha. Yeah. It's funny we see now, which I guess maybe not quite as much as when the show was happening, but a lot of books are like Game of Thrones meets or something meets Game of Thrones, or like even this year, I know J.S. Lewis, her Last Watch was like The Night's Watch meets The Expanse, which I thought that was like a cooler thing than Game of Thrones meets, because like you really know what The Night's Watch is at this point.
Right.
Game of Thrones can be kind of a little bit of anything depending on what season you're in, who you're following.
That's when that you've permeated like the zeitgeist, is when they don't reference like the book meets this, it's like an aspect of the book, like one plot line meets this, because there's like so much in there that you can reference. So it's cool.
Yeah, because you jump in Game of Thrones, or a book that says Game of Thrones, like it's like this is nothing like it. The only thing they have is like multiple POVs.
Yeah, exactly.
But and so I think a lot of people, like I said, started reading the Game of Thrones books when it came out, and I think that was kind of a way to get people into fantasy. And I think Lord of the Rings did that as well. A lot of people saw the show or the movies and wanted to read the books. And I think you're going to have another resurgence, kind of like with Wheel of Time and with the Amazon series for Lord of the Rings. I think you're going to kind of pull in those ones that maybe fell off of reading and are going to get back into it. Because I was talking to Mallory Kuhn the other day about, we both had where we like read a lot through like middle school and high school, and then fell off in college. And then we had like that one book that kind of brought us back. And then, here we are. She's published a book, and I've started this blog and BookTube and all that stuff, read all these books. But it's really interesting to see how people kind of come into reading. I try to do it as like I recommend stuff that maybe people will pick up and check it out. And then my way was just like my dad going, read this. And I go, okay. actually, this is really good. Why did I stop reading?
Yeah, and I think it is in a lot of cases, like it's that one book that kind of sparks it in people, and then you realize how many other sparks there are out there. So what was the book that you read that made you kind of want to, that got you back
It
into it?
was Wool by Hugh Howey. I've
Oh
talked
yeah, I
about
know
it
the book.
a few times. Yeah. That and the Martian by Andy Weir. I kind of read those like back to back. It was before the Martian movie came out. I think maybe the whole Wool trilogy was already out at that point. I can't remember. But yeah, just like I just read them, like, okay, I need more stuff. So it was one of those like, if you like this, you'll like this thing on the Amazon did, which was really helpful in the very beginning, and then it just kind of blew up to where now I'm like, I have no time to read all of this stuff.
Yeah, because I feel like like at first you're like, okay, I didn't realize books like this were out there, and then it's like, oh, there's another one. Then it's like, oh, there's so many of them that I'll die before I get to read them all.
Yeah, and then then your Kindle
like
has like 200 pages of books, and you're like, holy crap, why did I spend all this money? I literally bought every book that said it's like this.
Right. Casting a wide net,
Yeah, exactly. Freaking Amazon, I swear. So you said Game of Thrones was kind of like your foray back into it. So have you kind of kept with your reading of fantasy? I mean, I know they always say read what you write. So do you still read a ton of fantasy, or is there other stuff that you kind of take inspirations from, video games or even like science fiction or any other genres?
Yeah, I feel like as I was working on Blood of an Exile, I was reading a ton of fantasy, and you get introduced to Joe Abercrombie and Scott Lynch and kind of all those main guys, and a lot of them there were so many books already out. So as I was meandering through writing Blood of an Exile, I was reading tons and tons of fantasy. And then once I was kind of under contract for the trilogy, I stopped reading pretty much everything except my own drafts over and over and over again. Because I'm a very inefficient writer, so there's huge amounts of like rewriting and rereading. So for years, it was like a full stop. And I remember, I think it might be Joe Abercrombie. Like he gets asked, what books do you recommend? What are you reading? And he's always like, I don't read anything anymore. Like, sorry to disappoint. And I didn't understand it at the time, and then I sort of understand it a little bit more now. But now that this contract's over, I've sort of gotten back into some casual reading, which has been nice. And I feel like I've done some fantasy. I have dipped into sci-fi some. I actually just read Andy Weir's new thing, Hail Mary, which was really good.
Oh, so good.
Yeah, it was. And I have a tendency to read samples of things, enjoy the sample, and then kind of move on with my life and forget about it. And that was one where like I read the sample, I was like, this is really good. And then like remembered it like a month later. I was like, why didn't I actually just finish that book? So I enjoyed that. I've been actually dipping into thrillers a little bit. I've been reading some Tana French novels, which are sort of these Irish like detective novels. It's sort of like a nice palate cleanser. I spent so much time like putting people in the woods with swords and campfires, and this, most of them take place in Dublin, and it's this like modern crime thing. So that's been just like fun to sort of read something else.
yeah, that's what I do every now and then. I'll I'm very heavily fantasy oriented as far as my reads go, and then it's a little bit science fiction depending on just kind of timing, but I could listen to like a thriller or two a day, like in audio form, because it's one of those you can kind of do anything while it's going and you really won't miss a beat. Whereas in like fantasy or science fiction, especially like kind of like a sprawling epic, if you kind of daze for like 5 minutes, you're like, holy crap, I just missed like this massive change. Exactly. I find myself like having to rewind and go back through. But
there's something to be said for like a simple thriller plot where it's kind of whoever the protagonist is just working through some kind of linear issue. And yeah, I find comfort in that now after so many multiple POVs, world spanning things and all that.
And they're generally, I don't know, 6 to 10 hours, I guess, depending on as far as an audiobook goes. And I usually, listen to it about half that time. I've just gotten to the point where like 2 is too slow. So I'm at like 2.5, and I'm like, I do understand what's going on. But yeah, it's just nice because you focus on like one person, sometimes 2 people, and you're really just trying to figure out like what happens at the end. And so a lot of it's just kind of the build up to that, the existential dread. And then, like sometimes there's a twist halfway through. But yeah, it's, I've found some days, like if fantasy is just not doing it for me, and I just kind of keep finding myself zoning out. I'm like, all right, do I have a thriller I can just throw in and kind of get me through the day? And generally I do, because there are a lot of thriller novels out there.
Yeah. One thing I found too, and I've heard a few, my like recall of like any kind of names is really bad, but I've kind of like done a few thrillers where I guess it's so with fantasy, when I read other people's fantasy, and I was like, oh, I bet that they're doing this with this character to set up something like this. And I'm like a lot more analytical in terms of like where I think it's leading up to. And I kind of have predictions on not necessarily plot twists, but just like where I think it's going to go. Sometimes I'm wrong, but I'm usually like at least on track. But with thrillers, I just take it at face value. So when there's a twist, I'm like, oh my God, that was so cool. Cause I'm not trying to figure it out. I'm just like along for the ride. And that's been really fun to get surprised by stuff that probably almost everyone else saw coming. And I'm like a kid who saw a magic trick for the first time. I'm like, oh my God, that was so cool.
Yeah, I think I became a little jaded watching like a lot of Special Victims Unit, like growing up, like a lot of Law and Order, and so it was always like trying to figure out what happened. And I say the same thing with like my reading, because when I first really got back into it after doing Wool and The Martian, I started doing beta reading, and so I was picking out proofreading and stuff like that, and I always like find myself going, oh crap, why couldn't they fix that in the final draft? And like it really takes me out of the read. But yeah, it's with SVU is always like, okay, it's definitely not them because it's too easy,
Right.
so I find myself doing that. Not every time with thrillers, but a lot of the times. But there are some authors that it doesn't matter. Like I am always caught off guard. It blows me away. Like I read or listened to The Last House on Neelix Street by Ketron Award earlier this year, which comes out in a couple of weeks. And it's one of those that you have no idea, and it just slaps you in the side of the face at the end of it. Or Behind Her Eyes by Sarah Pinborough. That one was another one, which I didn't read the book, but I watched the show. I assume it's similar, but it was kind of like mind blowing at the end. But yeah, I always enjoy a good twist that I'm just like, oh, I gotta sit back for a second and really take it in.
Yeah, it's like a rare feeling to get like surprised by stuff sometimes. So it's really cool when it happens. And I think it's only with fantasy that I'm like an analytical person who's trying to figure stuff out. I take movies and shows and stuff like at face value. And we've been watching The White Lotus on HBO, which it starts with I guess it's not a spoiler because it's like it's the opening thing. So as soon as you start the series, you know, but it's kind of like a vacation thing in Hawaii, and it's sort of like, I guess, a cozy thriller, but they introduce the idea that someone dies at the end because there's like a coffin being loaded onto the plane, and it's like sort of the end of the trip, and then it flashes back. And that's the like opening scene. We watched the whole first episode, and people I was watching was like, so who do you think died? And it hadn't even occurred to me to try to think of who died. I was like, well, they'll tell us who died later on in the show. I'm not going to make any inquiries in that in my head. I'm just like watching it scene by scene. And I don't know, I think that I enjoy things more because I get surprised, but who knows?
No, I agree. I wish I could just turn my brain off sometimes and just enjoy something. But I think I blame my dad a little bit. I'm one of those that I'll be watching a show or a movie and they go, "Oh my gosh, that guy! You know that guy? I don't know his name, and like he was in that show." And I have to like go on IMDb and like figure it out, and I figure out like their entire life story, and it's just ridiculous. And I go, "Why can't you just watch it and then maybe figure it out afterwards?"
Yeah, exactly.
It takes a lot longer to do that, and like I'll lose enjoyment.
Well, it's funny you mentioned that. I feel like maybe the reason I stopped doing it, I remember I watched Lost in college, and me and my roommate, I think it was like the first season was already out, but we hadn't seen it, and then it was like second and third. So all through college we were watching Lost, and we would definitely like get onto the forums and like try to think about like what this means and what's going on. And the further you get into Lost, the more you realize how useless of a strategy, like an exercise that is, because it's just like the writers, I don't think, knew what was going on. So it was just like, well, it's a waste of time to predict what's going to happen. So maybe that was it, where I was just like, this is useless. I'm just going to let the show tell me. I'm no longer making predictions of any kind. So Lost broke me. That was the last time that I was like super into trying to like put the pieces together.
I just need to adopt that strategy, just let it happen.
Yeah, just lay back.
don't think about it too much. So as far as like your inspirations for writing your series, I know you said you Martin and the show, Game of Thrones show and so forth, like, and the showrunner got you kind of back into reading, but who kind of like, I guess, was your inspiration to go, I really want to write a fantasy story, and I really want to write a fantasy story about dragons, because dragons are awesome.
Yeah, it's interesting. So I kind of started that initial premise on a whim, just a dude with a hangover has to go kill a dragon. But I think I wrote what became the first chapter, like maybe a day or two after college, but then I didn't continue on with it. I kind of took a 3 or 4 year hiatus where I was reading a lot of fantasy, but just wasn't writing anything. I was trying to like scrounge a career out of having an English degree, which, took a hot minute. And then the reason I started writing again was because I had this really long bus commute and we got stuck in a snowstorm. So I just all of a sudden had like 6 hours on my hands. Maybe not 6, but it was a really long. The bus driver was like, I hope you guys have water and food because we're not getting to our destination anytime soon. And I had my laptop, so I like fired it up and started writing again. But I think by that time I think I'd read everything that Joe Abercrombie had written. And I think that it was, his stories are very different from mine, but I think that he showed me that you can, one, have like a pretty long action sequence that on its like head is pretty straightforward, but has a lot of almost like character development inside of it, if that makes sense. And so I was wanting to explore that kind of thing, this sort of like low level, like intimacy around small groups of people, like traveling through the wilderness and having like adventures and stuff like that. So I feel like that was kind of my, I wrote the initial thing without any idea how to write the rest of the novel. And then when I came back to it, I was like, this is the kind of thing I want to write, where it's this group of people and you're just constantly throwing stones at them and making their life harder and harder as things go along. And I think that was really kind of like, I'm not a big plotter. I'm not like, I didn't have a huge plan for it. I kind of just started picking away at it, like one bus ride at a time. And then the other kind of piece of it was that I wanted to, in so much as you can have a realistic book with dragons in it, like try to adhere to that rule. And so that kind of grew. That's how there's a big ecological aspect to my books where dragons are apex predators, and in some areas they've been overhunted, which has kind of caused the whole ecosystem to fall apart. And so that was my other kind of linchpin with the story, of like pulling on that thread as much as possible, of like, if dragons were real, like what would the world actually look like with them in it? And I feel like that was really what kind of kept me going, that and just having so much time on my hands every morning and evening as I was going home from work. And it took a long time because I wasn't in a rush. I like sort of knew how it was going to end, but I was trying to, vacation and little side things as it came up. So it took me 4 or 5 years, something like that, to actually get the thing, written and redrafted a little bit. And then, my kind of vision of what was going on was way different from start to finish, just because I started with very few constraints around myself, and just kind of went from there.
I gotcha. Yeah, that take on like, what would life be like with dragons? I always think, just because like it was massive when I was a kid, and that was like the only thing I did was Pokemon. So like I always think about like, what would it be like, like fighting forest fires with like all of these water type. Like what if like we could just send like all of these Squirtles to Colorado like to fight back forest fires?
They would be an asset for sure. A lot of problems will be solved, I feel like.
Just the nerd of me just coming out, man. It doesn't take much.
The nerds got to unite,
I know, right? Yeah, it's like Mallory and I were talking yesterday about being like the coolest uncool kids like growing up, and I was like, that's part of me. That's what it was. And I always wanted to dress up as Ash Ketchum when it was Halloween, and that was it. So, oh geez. So speaking of like how you started your draft and how you ended it and how things were one way and they ended up a different way, and your redrafts and rewrites and stuff. How has your process changed, I guess, since Blood and Exile to now, having published your third book of the series? Has it changed? Have you kind of figured out what works for you and what doesn't at this point? Or, did you like try things and they didn't work and now they do work?
I think it's definitely changed, and writing under a deadline is very different from writing casually on a bus. And there was definitely a freedom of, on the bus ride, I'd write a scene that I knew was bad and wrong, or like, just sort of like a world breaking thing. And I would just do it and then I'd carry on with my day. And once you're under a deadline, that freedom goes away a little bit. And if you write a scene that is screwed up, then that's just time that you had, like, you can't just move on with your life. You have to eventually fix it. And I tried outlining more carefully, and it didn't work very well for me in the second book or the third. Arguably it worked a little bit better, but the second one was my shot at, like, kind of a beat by beat outline, and I got, halfway or maybe 3/4 of the way through it of like a pretty rough draft, but trying to get it out, and rewrote the entire thing. I was like, this is not working. And I can't remember, it's been not so long, but just so many drafts. I think so. In the second book, a contingent of the main characters go to this island that's sort of very mysterious and remote, and it's kind of unclear what's going to happen to them there. The first draft didn't have that. Like, a completely different thing happened, and then I basically scrapped it. And so, yeah, outlining, while I tried it, didn't work particularly well, and I still kind of had this chaotic way of writing, but I wrote way more and added, like, I would write every day, and I would write for 3 or 4 hours in the morning and 2 or 3 hours in the afternoon. So it kind of, like, what I lacked in planning, I made up in just like pure output. And that one kind of got done that way. And then the third one was easier in a different process in some ways, because I kind of did a kind of book 1 and 2 is the characters getting further and further away from each other, and then I was kind of cognizant to bring them all back in book 3 to a more confined area. So, like, kind of book 2 ends with a lot of people in one place and this big problem they have to deal with. And so that, it's not so much that it, like, I outlined better, but I had fewer options to go screw up somewhere else. So I feel like book 3 probably got written, I wouldn't say it was the easy, it's hard to say which one was easier or harder, but I feel like I had a much clearer path, and it was a lot more refining of, like, all right, this is going to happen, but let me just change a few of the, like, stakes or a few of the goals, versus, like, I'm just going to have them go in a completely different direction. So I like to think that I had gotten better at just writing a fantasy novel in a compressed period of time by the third book, but in some ways I was helped out by the fact that I had just way fewer options, and it has to end too. So, like, you're not able to just go off and make some crazy mistake of plotting, because the curtain is coming, and so you can't dawdle too much.
It's got to end somewhere. It can't like end on a cliffhanger.
Exactly. I didn't want to blow up the word count either. They're all I think Sorcery of a Queen and Fury of a Demon are a little bit longer than Blood of an Exile, but not by, like, crazy orders of magnitude. They're all about the same length. I didn't want to, like, doorstop the third book and kind of write 5 books in disguise of writing 3 kind of thing. So I tried to keep it pretty slim.
I gotcha. How did
your fantasy?
Yeah. How did you or I guess how did your writing change with the pandemic? Because clearly you weren't doing your commute every day like you were. I assume you were working, writing a lot at home. Did it change the way in which you wrote? Did you find it easier? Did you find it more difficult? Because I know, when we first talked before Blood and Exile came out, like, that was like your thing. Like, you got on the bus, you did your scene or 2 scenes, and, like, it was just kind of just a daily thing, and you got it done. But now you're kind of having to change your routine a little bit. Like I said, did you find it more difficult? Did you find it easier? Did it grow on you?
Yeah, I feel like it wound up not being a crazy adjustment, because my routine was kind of like, right on the bus, and then I would go to a sports bar in the afternoon, kind of late afternoon, and do the rest of it there. And that obviously all got blown up by the pandemic. And I feel like what I wound up doing, and I feel like it makes me sound like a much more proactive person than I actually am. So I would just like do the morning writing, but I would, wake up really early, exercise. I would do burpees until I thought that I was going to throw up, and then I would take a freezing cold shower. And I can't really explain why I started doing that. I think it was just to have something happen to me before I was like sitting in front of a computer trying to write. And the one nice thing about the bus ride is that I would like bike to the bus, walk and like kind of get on it. You're kind of moving around a little bit. Like stuff happens to you before you're just sitting there being like, all right, what happens to these people today? And like doing kind of like shocking the system in the morning really helped me. And then I would go for a walk between like finishing my day job and starting to write in the afternoon. And that was super helpful too. Kind of just like give it a little bit of space and kind of think about what I was going to work on in that scene, but not like super directly, just letting it kind of marinate or whatever. And then that routine worked pretty well for me overall. That's kind of how the bulk of like Fury of a Demon got written. That was very much a pandemic book. I think I had like a pretty rough incomplete draft when kind of COVID came down. So I wrote most of it, in lockdown fear stuff. And it was, in some ways it was helpful to have a space to go to that wasn't, watching the stock market crash and all these people lose their lives and all this uncertainty. And there was uncertainty in the book too, obviously, but it was sort of in some ways just a welcome escape to just be outside of this increasingly frightening experience that we were all going through.
Yeah, I can imagine. But burpees, really? Burpees? I remember doing those.
It's like the fastest way to feel like you're gonna die. I don't know if it's healthy because
burpees and bear crawls. That was like this freaking killed me.
Yeah. I don't know if it was the greatest thing because you jack up your heart rate and then like take a freezing cold shower. I feel like it's probably bad for you. It's like I didn't have a heart attack or something while I was doing it, but.
It's just like go ahead and have like the life alert button like in your shower.
Yes, I think this might be this one burpee too many.
This literally might be the end. I think I need it.
It's like, oh damn it, I'm gonna die in a shower.
I haven't even finished my book. No.
So, avenge me.
Exactly. So let's go ahead and talk about your series. So Dragons of Terra. So I'm just going to go ahead and we're going to take a minute. We're going to go ahead and show all the covers. So these are the UK covers. But we've got Blood of an Exile, which is book one. Just a lovely, beautiful book. And then of course we've got book two, which is Sorcerer Queen, which they decided to go gold on this one. Which is even sweeter. And then of course we've got the final installment, which is Fury of a Demon. So tell the audience a little bit about the series itself, kind of like up to this point in the series, and then we'll talk about Fury.
Yeah, let's see here. I guess so. But the elevator pitch I always start with is that if you like Dragons and Wolverine from the comic books, that you should check the book out because it's basically an answer to the question of what happens if you take a really grumpy version of Wolverine and force him to become a dragon slayer against his will. And that's kind of the premise. And basically this is a world where dragons are everywhere. Like I was saying, they're kind of apex predators, and some countries have managed to eradicate them essentially, and other countries are kind of like the dragons own it and everyone else is just renting. Like it's very much a problem that any day you could just get scooped up by a dragon and killed. So the main character, Silas Bershad, is a dragon slayer, and the custom in that country is basically if you're a criminal and convicted of a crime, sometimes half for fun and have to prolong your punishment, they'll make you become a dragon slayer. So they mark your face with these tattoos, and you just have to keep on trying to kill dragons until you die, which for most people takes like 1 or 2 times. Like to survive one dragon slaying attempt is pretty rare. And Silas Bershad, the main character, has been doing this for 14 years. All right, I think around 14 years. It starts to get hazy for me. I haven't done a summary of the first one in quite a while, actually. So the reason he's been able to do that is, at the start of the series, mysterious to both him and the world, but he's become this sort of, folklore hero who the king hates him because the king thought he was going to be dead 14 years ago, and sort of the commoners love him, and he kind of hates himself and everyone. He's this very jaded character. And so in the first one, he winds up being sent on this sort of country spanning quest by his former girlfriend and current queen of one country to rescue a princess and assassinate an emperor. And it's always hard to like sum up a series without giving some kind of spoilers along the way, but I think it's like things I can say. In the first book, they have some successes and they have some failures, but they're not kind of done yet. And I think a lot of their successes have unforeseen consequences. So a lot of the second book is dealing with those consequences in one form or another. And a lot of kind of, smaller characters in the first book, kind of their roles get fleshed out and they wind up, like I was saying, everyone kind of scatters in different directions for the second book. And we hit this kind of apex point at the end of it. And Fury of a Demon is a lot about, a lot of characters who have never met each other are now, in the same spot on opposing sides of this pretty crazy war. And Fury of a Demon is really about resolving that war in one form or another.
Which, yeah. I would agree that Brashad is a little bit of a grump.
Yeah. I think someone said he's cantankerous, which I feel like is a word I would never use in my books, but that fits him pretty well, I think.
Yeah. It is interesting. So what made you, I guess, add the addition of kind of like the ecological deal with the dragons? Because a lot of books that you read, dragons are just kind of there, and generally they're not useful. I mean, some books, people can ride them, some books they're companions, but most books, like, they're just kind of like they're killing people, and like you just have somebody that needs to deal with it. So what made you, I guess, have that additional interest or intrigue into the story about adding that ecological facet?
Yeah, I think I knew about the concept of trophic cascades, which is the idea that apex predators play like a much bigger role in their environment than it may seem from this documentary about Yellowstone, the wolves of Yellowstone. And it was basically a study that, like, the wolves of Yellowstone Park got basically killed or moved out of it, and they started seeing this degradation of the ecology. Herbivores got to eat too much because they weren't sort of stressed out looking for prey, and that led to erosion and just sort of all sorts of like miniature problems. Well, not miniature, but kind of like problems that you wouldn't think would happen just because wolves are gone. Basically, these streams are now like overrun with erosion, and trees are kind of getting washed out and stuff like that. So that I knew about that concept very lightly. And then I think really the thing that sparked it is that I had this other character, Ashlyn, who's the other kind of main character of the series, besides Silas Brashad. And she is like the only like environmental activist who exists in the world. She's a very lonely kind of eco warrior. And having her in there, she has a very scientific mind. And those two things sort of worked in tandem, like her kind of being someone who would realize that kind of thing is going on, and then realizing that there's a lot of room to pull on that thread too. And so with those two things combined, I sort of really dug into it pretty far. And dragons are just cool. I remember my agent, when she, said she wanted to represent me, she's like, so I need to read, I'm going to give you notes, but it's going to take me, a few weeks, maybe a month. So while you're waiting, you should do an appendix of all the dragons that you mentioned in the story. And I think she meant for me to take like a day or two, and I took like the entire month to work on the appendix because I just like I hadn't thought of it that way. But once like someone told me to like think about their size and think about what their habitat is and their behaviors and how they breed and like get their food and stuff like that, I just like went down so many Wikipedia holes of how different animals do that, and was just sort of jamming all the animal facts I'd ever encountered in my life into these dragons. So I think that was probably it too. I just got really carried away with trying to envision like how much diversity you'd have with dragons and stuff like that. And Colorado is actually where I live now. has a lot of different types of birds because there's so much different elevations. So you've got like, you know, meadows, super high altitude mountains, and kind of everything in between. So just being out here and seeing all the different kind of birds that are around, it was sort of this fodder for like, all right, I'm going to do a dragon for that bird and that bird and that bird. And then I had to cut a lot out of the appendix. I feel like I sent it to my agent. She was like, this is good, but this is like you need to cut this down by 75%. This is really long.
You should just like create like a dragon catching guide.
yeah, exactly.
Or a dragon watching guide. There you go.
Yeah.
So since you base them on birds. Yeah, it's interesting. And you like try to figure out like what the best like feed for different dragons is.
Yeah, exactly. And I feel like it was in there where it was like very granular. Like, I don't know if I had like type of food they eat at certain times of year, but I was like approaching that level.
Oh my gosh.
And it's hard because like, you know, I was so excited that, you know, she wanted to represent me and she gave me this task, and then like, you know, it's just an open-ended month. So I just couldn't stop. I just kept on going.
I'm curious, have you read, which I haven't read the series, but is it A History of Dragons by Marie Brennan? Have you read that series?
I haven't. I'm aware of it. It's in my realm, you know, of the dragon thing. It looks really cool, but yeah, I haven't had a chance to read it. And I actually haven't read too much stuff with dragons in it since the deal went through, almost on purpose, just because it's not so much that I wanted to make sure kind of whatever dragon thing I was doing was going to be coming like just from me instead of from some cool thing that I read. So I
can imagine you just started reading books. You're like, oh my gosh, that's really cool. I need to use that.
Yeah. Well, I think it goes both ways. It's either like you see something that's really cool and like you wind up kind of like using it without realizing you're using it, or it's too late. You see a really cool thing that's like, I should have done something like that. So it's like envy or kind of like being influenced when you don't really realize. I probably should do that. I should go back and read all the like awesome dragon books that have come out that I kind of like passed over on purpose. And it's probably like the next 5 years of my reading life because there's so many good books. But
so what are you working on now? You know, we've got the finished trilogy. You know, just released last week, and congratulations again on the finished trilogy. So what's next in the books?
Yeah, I'm in one of the situations. I'm one of the situations where it's all pretty preliminary, which makes it secret by nature of like it could all change. So I can give a pitch of something I'm working on, and then if it comes out later on in life, it like bears no resemblance to it. It's fantasy though, and there's sort of a few different irons in the fire, and some are more preliminary than others. But I feel like it's safe to say there's it's gonna read as fantasy, and there's going to be swords and foul language and stuff involved. But it's been fun recently, so I kind of have one project that's pretty well fleshed out and kind of making the rounds and the powers that be, and then after that I find it very easy to write the first 10,000 words of a book. They're not good words, but it's sort of just like that just goes pretty quickly. So I've been in this phase of kind of like window shopping all these different, I have like 10,000 words of like 7 or 8 different ideas. And I think because I don't have to be pinned down on anything quite yet, I'm almost not even trying to go further than that. And they're all probably bad, but I what I'm doing kind of right now is just like vacationing in these little premises. And I feel like what happens to me a lot with that even is that none of them on their own are really enough to make a book, but if I kind of just keep on trying different things, eventually like 3 of them will kind of fit together into something. It's like, oh, okay, like all these actually can belong in the same world, and see where it goes. But it's fun because you can I feel like I did an interview last week and I said this, and it happened again today, where I wrote a scene this morning that was just terrible. It's completely unusable. But it doesn't matter. I'm just going to carry on with my day, and I don't have to stress about it. I'll have a nice weekend. So I'm trying to enjoy that period of time for as long as it's made available to me.
I gotcha. And then the last question I got for you: what have you read recently, or are you reading anything right now that you'd recommend?
Yeah, I have the book that I just started that is it came out recently, The Coward. I don't know if the sun is shining off of that too much to be able to see it. Yeah, that's good. And yeah, actually, the first line is hilarious. I was kind of perusing a bookstore. I'm gonna read it because why not? So, Kel Cressia, slayer of the Ice Lich and savior of the 5 kingdoms, tripped on a rake and fell into a pile of horse shit. So that's just like, that had me from first line. I love that kind of stuff. There's so much like world building in it mixed with like humor and a pile of shit, and there's tons of piles of shits in my book. So for better or for worse, I've had comments of like, do you have to have like feces in your book so much?
Yes, you have to.
Like, unfortunately I do. Yeah, in Fury of the Demon, there's actually there's a scene where they're going through the jungle, and it's a very dragon infested part of it, and there's just massive piles of dragon shit. And I was I was pulling from in Jurassic Park when there's that huge pile of Triceratops crap in like before everything goes terribly. So I was like, screw it. I mean, dragons, everybody poops, including dragons, and they're going to be pretty big. So anyway.
You know, I always think back to that scene. I think it's in season 2. It may be in season. I think it's in season 2 of Game of Thrones, where oh my gosh, I am blanking on names. The head Lannister, the father, where he rides
Tywin Lannister.
Where he rides into the hall, and he's on a horse. It's right after they've defeated Stannis in the Blackwater, and he's riding on the horse. But like the scene starts out with the horse dropping a deuce, like right as he's walking in. And
yes, I remember.
Is that necessary? But like, it happens. Like, horses just do that.
Yeah, horses are always pooping.
Like, I'm wondering, like was that is that how that happened, or like did like just film it like that's perfect? Let's just use it.
Yeah, I wonder too if it's like everything else was perfect and they just couldn't get that horse to stop crapping during like the good takes. And they're like, all right, this is costing like $1,000 a minute for all of us to be here, so just run it.
Right, we'll just run with it. If anybody says anything, don't worry about it. Yeah, and you know, of course, then you have like all the miscues in the last season, like where they had like the Starbucks cup like on the table and stuff. Like you kind of like wonder, like, is that just like a gimmick thing, like get people to not realize like how rushed the season was?
Yeah, I wonder about that Starbucks cup. I mean, I can see where like things just get so complicated that what seems easy, which is to make sure there are no Starbucks cups in the scene, actually becomes very difficult. And like when you hear about there was a book kind of like, it was like a behind the scenes, not quite a making of Game of Thrones. It was a journalist who'd been almost like embedded in it from day one, and there was just so many issues. It was so complicated, and the budgets were so tight, and there was like terrible weather all the time. And it's sort of like if you're about to do this massive scene and like it just rains for 19 days straight, like that is an extremely problematic thing to deal with from like a production standpoint. So I can't remember the name of that book either. I wish I had perfect recall like a D&D character, but I do not. But it was really interesting, and it's sort of like from like day one, everything was extremely difficult. So I'll forgive them the Starbucks cup. Some of the plotting things I have less forgiveness for, because that's more of a writing issue. But
yeah, I'm doing a little bit of a rewatch just because like I'm going back through the books, which I'm still struggling through a Feast for Crows. Like I'm struggling so hard through that book. Like I love the Storm of Swords. And like this one, like I just keep setting it aside every time like I think about picking it up, because it just nothing happens. Like, nothing. It's all Brienne and how ugly she is. It's literally like the whole book, and like all these characters that like they just didn't even use in the show. Like all these characters, like they have all these just random chapters, and I think it's one of those like this one was the one I think that had like the longest in between, I think 3 and 4.
I think it was like
a big letdown or whatever. So I'm really hoping Dance gets better, but I've been told it doesn't. So I guess we'll just see.
Yeah, it's
but I'm going ahead and rewatching the show just to see like, okay, was it as bad as I thought it was at the end, or like did I just buy into the not hype that everybody was giving it?
Yeah, it's definitely, and I think there's because I was reading, I guess A Dance with Dragons was like, I kind of read straight through everything from there, and then I had to wait quite a while too. Not nearly as long, I like maybe a year or two, and just sort of the fact that I had to wait so long, I think I took off work and just read it, day of release, and burned through it that way. But it's also so hard to come from like the unputtable down effect of like, for me, the first 3 books, and especially like the third one where I was like with my family on a holiday, and we were all supposed to be like going into Christmas dinner. I was like, no, this is the Battle of the Blackwater. I will see you guys later. Like I didn't know what happens here. And like keeping that level of like tension on from every chapter, I think is you know, hard to match
Yeah.
for anyone. You know?
Right. Yeah. I mean, you have the battle, you've got the Red Wedding. I mean, it's all there.
Exactly.
And then like you get to feast and you're like, can something happen? Maybe.
Yeah.
All these people
exactly,
are just like kind of talking and like riding on horses. Like that's really
yeah, a lot of stews and stuff like that. So yeah, I think just
a lot of stews.
yeah, the pacing like slows down from there. But,
For sure.
I'll always love those books, one way or another.
Yeah, definitely. Well, Brian, I appreciate you taking the time to come chat with me. Again, congratulations on the finished trilogy. It's a phenomenal trilogy. I know Jason's got a couple of reviews coming up for I guess he's doing the whole series like read right now. So definitely be looking for some more reviews to come out. And I know Neil just posted his review of Fury, I guess last week. So that's pretty awesome. But best of luck in all of your, what did you say, 7 or 8 potential,
my 7 or 8 samplings,
potential 10,000 case samplings. And you know, we'll definitely have to do this again, you know, once I guess you get the big news of the next series. So
yeah, definitely, always fun to chat with you.
Absolutely, man. Well, enjoy your weekend and we'll talk soon.
Definitely, you too.
Thanks.